Should be working. Okay, it's working. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll do this, and then I just need to put that over there. Okay, so why don't we want to, I'm gonna actually open Clack and see if it's tolerable. We'll do balance because that's kind of where I like it. And then I like it. And then and then we'll do balance because that's kind of where I like it. Okay, that sounds good. All right. Okay, so we're going to be looking up React render props and kind of spending a little bit of time reading about this. So a render prop is basically just a prop that a component has that tells the component how to render something. And children can be a render prop too. So you can manually define children as a function that returns a React element, and then you can render that React node. So one of the things that I want to do probably pretty soon here is create a really brief tutorial on how to write a render props component that you can use to trigger shadcn uh, dialogues because I think the way I've had to implement drop-down menus where one of the items in the menu triggers a shadcn dialogue, and it's always been really annoying doing that because I think the solutions that I've seen online are generally not the best idea for that. So you might have some item in a drop-down. Here, let's see. I'm going to do this. Let's do this. We're gonna do base UI, I think. I think when I write the tutorial, I'll probably do it with both Radix and base UI, but for now, I'll just do base UI. So yeah, let's just reset Vega Nova. Icons Geist. I guess it does not matter literally at all, but hmm. Oh, that's right. How do I invalidate? Um, Okay, we're good. Um, let's do this one more time. Oh, whoops. I still don't know. I don't even know if Z has a command for opening. Location in Z. Oh, whoops. Command O. Yeah, I just started using Z. We'll see how good I am at this. Okay, so first thing we want to do, we have alert dialog, we have drop down. So what we want to do is create a new route here, and let's call this. Actually, let's go ahead and do this in the root here, and the first thing we want to do. Okay, so we're good there. Now what we want to do is create a drop-down menu. So we'll go ahead and do drop-down menu. Uh, oops. I don't even know. How did I do that? Can you just move lines? Oh, oh, that's cool. So option, I guess, lets you move lines. Um, huh. What's going on here? That's weird. Actually, let's do this. Mm, whoops. Okay, so we're just putting this button in the middle of the screen. I'm gonna actually go to the root real quick and get rid of the dev tools. We don't need that. What is this? What? Expected space or tab after slash. I wonder if it means. I have no idea what that means. Okay. Uh, Whoops. Let's do uh, okay, cool. All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and begin. The first thing we want to do is probably explore how we would trigger a dialogue the wrong way. So one way you might do this is literally where you have your drop down menu, you might define some React state and you would say like is open or something like this. And we will initialize it with false. Okay, well, I really don't like these like stupid linting errors, but that's okay. Okay, so one of the things you might do is you might define like a React state up here. And then we might define, I think probably, let's see, function. Uh, oh, trying to think because the the bad way of doing this would be to manage state where the drop down menu is, and then render the dialogues below the drop down menu or as a sibling, just not within the drop down menu. Because what happens when you click one of these items in the drop down menu is, whoops, the drop down menu closes, right? So if you render the dialogue within the drop down menu, it will unmount. The drop down, the alert dialog does render the dialogue to a portal, but actually, I think it does. Let's inspect. I'm pretty sure it renders it to a portal. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. So let's see here. Where does it render it? It does render it at the bottom of the body. I'm just trying to see div. Right. So this is the div. It renders at the bottom of this div, which must be something TanStack provides. Oh, no, that's just the root route container. Okay, so that's the container. And of course, the menu is rendered below. Okay, so yeah, it does render it to some sort of portal. And so when you click this, it disappears because the actual dialogue is rendered within the drop-down menu, even though the dialogue itself, like the content, is portaled to the body somewhere. So, what we want to do is kind of demonstrate one way of solving this problem that I've seen people solve the problem, which is to manage the state as in a sibling location or in a location that's sibling to the drop-down menu or above it, and then allow one of the items within the menu to trigger that state change and in turn show the dialogue. So I'm just going to show a kind of crappy way of doing this. We'll just say dialogue example. We're going to get rid of the trigger, and one way of doing this is to, I suppose you could provide a state provider, or you can use like Jotai or something like this. Why don't we just install Jotai and do that? Because I don't feel like creating a provider. Okay, can I? Whatever. All right, let's just do this. Okay, so just imagine we do this. Let's say we define some atom. We're going to call it dialog atom, and then we're going to create the atom. Oh, actually, we want this to just be use atom for sure. Oh, oops, show dialog atom. Completely forgot. So, okay, so here is like this. Set show dialog. And then we're going to say on open change. Pass in that val. And then we can basically just render this dialog example below the drop-down menu. So we're going to put this just like this. What's the problem? Property children is missing, right? Because we don't need children anymore. Because I realized what we were doing. Okay, so basically what's going to happen here is that we're going to choose the item that we want to trigger this. So we're going to set show dialog true, and that should be all we need. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So you click the button, the state changes. We open the dialog by setting this atom state. We consume the atom state within the actual dialog itself, and we conditionally render it using the open on and on open change props within the alert dialog. So, okay, this technically works. And if you wanted to have a really large drop-down menu, say something with like 10 items, and many of these items are actions where you want to perform mutations and you want to perform side effects based on those mutations, and which would, maybe you trigger you'd invalidate different queries and stuff like that. So like obviously in a drop down menu, you're not going to have a single item that lets you close your account without like further prompting and stuff like this. So many of these items you would want to show some sort of dialogue. And so you would say, okay, well, why don't I do this? Why don't I define my drop-down menu as a single big component? And then I can store every single one of these actions inside this component folder. And then I can just conditionally show every single one of these dialogues by triggering state from the drop-down menu to individually show these dialogues. So I would define one piece of state for the close account dialog. I would provide another one for the delete user or invite user or whatever it is. And you can individually trigger these different dialogues, which are all essentially kept in the one place. You could literally render 10 of these dialogues in a single dialogues component. And then every single one of these dialogues are triggered conditionally based on some piece of state that you consume or that you consume and set within the actual component that renders the dropdown. So this sounds like convoluted. I'm probably not explaining this very well, but the point of this is that this is one way of doing it, where you would render the dialogues as siblings to the drop-down menu. So when the drop-down menu closes, the dialogues are not unmounted from the DOM. But this, as it turns out, is not a really good solution because you have to store the state above the drop-down. Or sorry, you have to store the state as a sibling of the dropdown. I really don't like this because ideally, in my head, the way that I think about development is if I'm going to define some action where that action is almost always tied to a prompt, right? Where we want to prompt some user input before performing that action, it's probably wise to create some component that has self-contained logic for both showing the prompt and performing the mutation. And so I want to show an experiment with one way of doing this. So instead of having to track state as a sibling of the drop-down menu and conditionally rendering these dialogues into a dialogue list component, we can actually think of things a little bit differently. So there's this paradigm in React called render props or children as props or children as render functions. But children as render function are still technically render props. And render props are essentially just props of a component that describe to the component how to render something. So you could include, let's take a look at the React docs here. You could include a render item prop. You could include a render item prop here that essentially allows you to render a component within a property. So you provide a callback function as a prop, and this function returns a component. And so then within the component, you can literally just call render item, and it will render the item provided in that callback function. So I will show you kind of how this works. We're going to explore how this works with ShadCN. I think I'm going to eventually make a tutorial on this because I haven't really seen people taking this approach, and I really think they should. I think it is very smart. It's very smart to try and contain the logic of your application so you can reuse it in different places and not have to create these very convoluted list providers. Because if you wanted to say, create another drop-down menu that has a subset of these items alongside additional items, you'd have to create a new list of dialogues. And that's really not ideal. So let's go ahead and jump into how we might do this. The first thing we want to do is create a component. We're going to call this action.tsx. Now, what we're going to essentially do is use a render props component so that we can wrap a drop-down menu item and render the dialog as a sibling of the item without unmounting the action dialog. So let's go ahead and create a component. We'll just call it close account. Close account is going to Okay, so close account is going to be a component that takes in this render prop, but instead of like, for example, defining, because we could technically define a prop that's called render item of type function that returns React node, we could totally do that. And then we could render close account like this. And it totally would render the item. So let's go ahead and let's just comment out children and just keep render item right now. Okay, so let's go into our index page and let's go ahead and just render underneath all of this. Let's render close account. And let's go ahead and delete our dialog example. We don't need it anymore. Let's delete this atom. And let's get rid of this on click callback. Okay, cool. So you can see we're using close account here. We're utilizing this render prop called render item. We're providing a function that returns a React DOM or React node, which is hello world. And if we look at our app, we can see it's actually rendering here. And so we can expand the functionality of this by providing props to the render props component, and then those props can be used in its final render. So for example, if we go here and we come up with this property name, we can now render name alongside our rendered item. And so you can see our close account component screaming at us to give us a name. I'll just use my name here. Boom, look at that. So we render two things here. We're both rendering a prop called name, and we're rendering a component provided through this callback in the render item prop, which is super cool. And this gives us a little bit of flexibility. We can start thinking, okay, well, if we want to create some alert dialog that triggers when we click an item, then perhaps we could render the dialog as a sibling of the item itself. And so let's try that. So let's go ahead and get rid of name. Let's actually get rid of render item, because I'll show you, we can technically just render our children like this. So now when you create a component and it accepts some children, usually it's accepting children of type react.react node. Whoops. And then you render the children just like this, right? You can technically change the type of how you use children. This is a feature of React. You can you can essentially use children as a render prop, right? And you can modify the type of the function that it's expected because when you create a layout component, or sorry, when you create a component that renders children, when you pass children in, you're just passing in React components, which are just functions, right? And so children is technically a render prop. At least that's the way I think about it. This could be wrong, but really all that's happening in React when you provide children to a function that renders children is that you're just calling that function as you're rendering the called function. I'm probably not describing this in the best way. I still have to kind of wrap my head around some of the details, but essentially what we can do is create this component so that, let's see, let's get rid of these items. We don't need them. And so now that we are using children as a render props, we can technically just do this. And check it out. It will indeed work. It's rendering hello world. Okay, so now what are we going to do? Well, like I said, we can use the render props function to allow us to render this dialog, this alert dialog, as a sibling of the drop-down menu item, and then use this render props function to trigger certain actions and control the drop-down render state. So I'll show you here. If we go to action, actually, I wonder, can I? I've always wondered, how do I swap tabs? Doesn't matter, I suppose. What we want to do is we want to take this alert dialog and we're going to bring it in. Oops. We're going to bring it into this component because this is where we're going to actually render the alert dialog. Let's see. Yeah, that's good. I'll just use that one. Whoops. So here's what we want to do. I don't even know why I did that. That's silly. Okay. Okay, so I'll show you. When we do this, we can say, okay, cool. So as you can see, the alert dialog is now rendering beneath the drop-down menu. But what we can do is move this in to the drop-down menu. So we actually render the drop-down menu, and then we're wrapping this drop-down menu item with this close account render props component, and this component will render this menu item. So if we look, okay, cool. So you can see I've manually kind of set state to the open state to true here, so that when the drop down menu renders, it renders the dialog. Cool. But here's the thing: we want to. So this is the difference between doing it the way that I see a lot of people doing it, which is managing the dialog open state above in the componentry above the dialog itself or the drop down menu itself, so that when the drop down menu unmounts, the dialog doesn't get unmounted. The better way of doing this instead is to actually keep track of the dialog open state within the dialog component itself, and then just don't close the drop-down menu until you're ready to close the dialog. So how do you do that? Well, I'll show you. So now we don't need to use any Jotai state or anything like that. We don't need to use providers. We'll literally just track the state within the render props component. We'll do this. Whoops. Okay, good. So now when, I'll show you, when we open the menu, nothing happens because the open state is initialized to false. So now we need some way of changing this open state from outside of the component itself. And the way that we're going to do this is with a function. So we're going to define a function. And this function, oh, sorry, that's not right. The children type needs to be changed here. So we're going to define this open function like this. Let's see here. Okay, so I will. Hmm, okay. So now we have this open function. Essentially, what we're doing here is the we're providing the function that we use to render the child with this open handler. And so where we use the render props component, we can actually destructure this open function and then we can call it. So we're going to do this. We're going to say open because that's there. And so when we click this drop-down menu item, it opens the alert dialog, but you're seeing something weird happen here, right? We click this and all of a sudden it opens and then it quickly closes. Well, what's going on here? Well, actually, when you click this drop-down menu item, it also triggers a close on the drop-down menu. So what we want to do is we want to use this new this base UI property on the drop-down menu item, and it's called close on click. And we're just going to make that false. So if we click close account, it now opens up. The drop-down menu is still going to be open. So when we click cancel, the drop-down menu is open. And so we have to think, well, what if we want the drop-down menu to close when we click close in the dialog? Well, we need to provide a callback function. So I'm going to go back to action here. We're going to create a function. We're going to call this onClose. And it's literally just going to be any function, right? So when in here, if value is true, so like if we want it to open, then if val set is open true. Otherwise, we're going to do these two things. We're going to call this optional onClose function. So we're going to say and then we're going to set is open to false. There's actually a more succinct way of writing this. So we can say, here, let's just do this. Let's say val whoops. Maybe not. Am I stupid? So we can say if val set is open true, whatever. Let's just go back to how we wrote it. Okay, cool. And so now essentially what's happening here is when the open state changes to true, we want to set is open to true. But if it's to false, we want to set it to false. So we want to actually close the dialog. But we also want to call this optional callback function called onClose. And what we're going to do here is we're going to provide this function. And so when we close here, it alerts us and it says, hey, closed. Okay, cool. So then how do we change this? Well, the answer is this. Usually when you have a drop-down menu somewhere, it's going to be in its own contained component. So we'll just create another is open piece of state. And we're just going to call this false. And we're going to control the drop-down menu using this piece of state. And so in this onClose callback, we can simply close the drop-down menu. Okay, you click continue, click cancel, whatever. Cool. And this is essentially how this works, which is very nice. The other thing we want to think about is that a lot of times these dialogues are tied to some action, right? So in the case of like close account, you would be calling some mutation, and then depending on whether that mutation is successful or false, you would want to close the dialogue or show some toast or some error message or something like this, right? And so there is a way to expand the functionality of this action component so that we can actually do all of this logic within the one component and then trigger the dialog open close based on the result of this stuff. So what I want to do is I want to install TanStack React Query, and we're going to play with some mutations here. So let's go ahead and in here, we're going to do const mutation equals use mutation. Whoops. It's one thing I'm noticing with Z, it's not very good. At least its type engine is not working so well for me. Okay, so we have this mutation function now. And one thing that we might want to do, so for example, in this close account component, we might want to show a pending state if the mutation is pending. And so what we want to do is we want to go to the type of the children, which is again a render props function, and we want to add something else. And we're going to call this is pending. Now, is pending is literally just going to be a Boolean. It's going to be a state item. And it's literally just going to be a state item. And so here, let's do is pending is going to be equal to mutation dot is pending. Okay. And so one thing that we want to do is when we click the action here, we want to actually trigger this mutation. Now we can use mutate async. I'm just going to use mutate for now. It doesn't really make a difference for what we're doing. Okay, so we now provide is pending as a prop. And so we're going to go to here and we're going to say is pending, or we'll say if not pending, then we want to render close account. Otherwise, we're going to render pending. Cool. So let's go ahead and click this. Whoops. Failed to no query client. Oh, of course. I can't believe I'm trying to use React Query without a query client provider. Okay, cool. Let me just real quick do this. I am very messy today. All right, that's okay. Let's see what we got. We're going to go to install. Da, 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 da. Right, so client provider. Okay, cool. So let's just go ahead and do this. In the root, let's do. Wait a minute. Interesting. Okay, so when we click continue, it should trigger the mutation, unless I wrote the mutation function wrong, which I probably did, to be honest. Yeah, I probably did. Let's go take a look. So I'm just gonna add on mutate console.log mutate just to be sure that it's triggering. It's kind of a silly thing, but okay, so it is calling mutation, but is pending is not working, and I think it's because okay, so I think I might actually be stupid. Yeah, so it's literally a function that returns the promise, and then oh, you just pass resolve in. Interesting. Okay, so let's do this. New promise. Because I'm pretty sure you could just write them like this and then call it. No? Yeah, see, you're supposed to wrap it, but the way I was doing it was wrong. You were supposed to wrap it in. Well, I thought that's what I was doing, but whatever. Let's just pass this in. Okay, cool. So now this should work. Let's have a look-sees. Oh, I'm so dumb. I completely forgot. I was actually rendering the pending state here, but you can't actually see it because it's behind the dialog. So what we want to do is the same thing here. So we're going to literally just say like mutation dot is pending, pending, otherwise close. Oh my gosh, I'm fat fingering so bad. Pending, it'll time out, and then it'll be done. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is when when the mutation is successful, we want to call this onClose function. So I'll show you on success, because we're going to actually potentially do some other things here, but I guess for now we'll just call it like, okay. So when the mutation is successful, we'll call onClose. And we can also call set is open to false. So we'll do this. It'll succeed and then the it'll close the dialog and it'll also close the dropdown. So we'll look at this one more time. So it's pending, closes the dropdown, and it closes the dialog. Super cool. So now let's go ahead and expand the functionality a little bit here. Let's say you didn't want to render a dialog all the time. You could technically just return mutation.mutate or mutation.mutate async inside the children. And so you could literally, instead of just managing this prompt state, you could always use this render props component to trigger the mutation and then determine what that workflow looks like, where you use it, and then optionally use the dialog. That's one way of doing it. I have done it this way in my current project, but I'm starting to feel like that's not necessary. So, like for example, a lot of times, for me personally, I use ORPC with React Query, so I never have to worry about the complexity of how I'm going to call and manage the life cycle of a mutation because it's always defined in mutation options returned by ORPC. And so my feeling is that a component like this probably should be strictly for rendering a dialog. So in the case of updating your account, deleting your account, doing whatever, you probably should just use this render props component just for the purposes of mutation, like wrapping a mutation with this prompt, this dialog. So it's pretty simple. I thought this was probably worth playing around with. I will probably make a tutorial out of this pretty soon here, but I just wanted to sit down and play around with it. So this was done using Shadcn's new base UI implementation, but if you do this with Radix, then the way you manage the drop-down menu state is a little bit different. So instead of using this close on click to false, you would actually use, and instead of using on click, you'd actually use on press, and then you would call it event.prevent default, and also you would call open just like that. But base UI is a little bit better. You don't have to do that. You just manually tell the component whether or not you want to close it when you click. But anyways, yeah, that's about it. Just wanted to play around with that. And I guess that is it.